Okay, can everyone hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay, jazakallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. So my dear respected brothers and elders and also youngsters, today I wanted to talk about, I've been asked by your Imam Mullah Hudayfa to talk about Islamic education in the West. And to look at it in a holistic way. So what I decided to do was to look at the way we kind of formed our madrasa, Fatima Elizabeth Kate's Academy, and the kind of challenges we faced, and also the challenges not only our madrasas are facing and will be facing in the future, but most importantly, the difficulties and challenges that our youngsters, our students are facing currently and will face in the future. So keeping that in mind, I decided to talk about Islamic education from that perspective. Okay. And before I start, I just want to say as well at the same time, if at any point you want to raise an issue, if you want to ask a question, you're more than welcome to do that at any point. Raise your hand and do that, inshallah. Okay? Okay, so first of all, about 2.5 years ago, alhamdulillah, Allah gave us the opportunity to form and start a madrasa. We named it Fatima Elizabeth. We named it after one of the very first female Muslim converts or reverts to Islam in Victorian Britain. Okay? I might talk about her towards the end, but for now, when we started, we were basically facing challenges. Okay? We were facing challenges in the sense that I felt, I graduated from Dewsbury Madrasa. Following that, I did a degree, and then a master's, and then I did a PGCE to become a qualified teacher. Now, as part of becoming a qualified teacher, you have to go to different schools for experience before you start the actual course, about 3-4 schools. And that gave me the chance to meet many students, many Muslim students from different schools, including the borough, outside the borough as well. And I used to ask them this question. I used to ask them, where do you enjoy going? Do you enjoy going to school, or do you enjoy coming to madrasa? Now this question, for me, is a very important one. Why is this an important question for me? To give you context to that, if our children were studying Islamic education or Islamic studies in countries like Pakistan, Morocco, majority Muslim countries, we wouldn't have the same question, we wouldn't have the same problem, and our children wouldn't face the same challenges that they are here. Okay? Because over here, when they become teenagers, they have a choice. Okay? It's either the secular kind of notion, the non-Islamic notion that they gain from the school environment that they will choose, or it's what they're gaining from the madrasa environment that they will gain. So because they have that choice, I think it's incredibly important that we rethink about our madrasa education to make it more vibrant, more beautiful for them. So that's one thing. That Muslim children living in Muslim countries won't have this problem. They live in a Muslim environment. Here is different. They are being pulled by different forces. So what happened was when we started our madrasa, I went to different schools, and I used to ask students this question: do you like your school or do you like your madrasa? So I think it was 100% we prefer our school over our madrasa. So when I heard that, at that point I thought that inshallah at some point I will open and found a madrasa where this will be overturned and changed. So in order for that to happen, when we started 2.5 years ago, we looked at 4 different points that we wanted to change. Okay? And this is where I'll welcome your feedback, and if you have any issues, you can raise them as well. So we decided that to start off with, our pedagogy, by pedagogy we mean the method of teaching, the different styles and different methodology of teaching. Our pedagogy and teaching methodology will be formulated around these 4 points. Number 1, we will give our children in a madrasa an Islamic education which is an experience-based education, which caters for the individual needs of pupils and thrives on their unique learning skills and abilities. Now what we try to do in all of this is go back to Prophet ﷺ's pedagogy. Okay? Prophet ﷺ's style. So when it came to experience, Prophet ﷺ's teaching method was mostly through experience. Okay? Why? Because through experience, through those relationships with his students or the Sahaba, okay, he was able to focus on their unique learning skill. Umar radiallahu anhu, he used to get angry when there was injustice. Right? Prophet ﷺ was able to use that skill in the favor of Islam. Now when Umar radiallahu anhu then became a Muslim, okay, he was able to go, confront the kuffar of Mecca, and he was able to go in front of the Kaaba and pray out aloud without anyone to stop him. Okay? So that's one thing, experience-based. And the reason why experience-based, there's a professor called, there was a professor, John Dewey his name was. He's written a book called Experience and Education. And he talks about how our educational experience later on forms our way of life. So for instance, when our students are 18, when they're 16, 17, 18, 19, in the prime of their teen, when they look back at their Islamic education and the experience that they've had, it should be a positive one for them to now live their life according to Islam. Okay? That's one of the first things that we spoke about. Number 2, there needs to be a holistic method. I'll talk about what that is, which encourages active independent learning, and the teacher takes the place of a facilitator and guide. Now, I've written the word hadi. The teacher must be a hadi. There's two meanings for that. A guide. Now we go back to Islamic logic and a bit of philosophy, where there's 2 meanings for guide. Okay? One hadi is the one who does al-isal il-matlub, where he takes you by the hand. So if you're lost in the streets, okay, one type of hadi is he will take your hand and take you to your destination by holding your hand. But you become dependent on such a hadi. Okay? The second type of guide is the one who does ira'at al-tariq. He doesn't hold your hand and take you, rather he shows you the way, he guides you. So you become independent, so that later on when you become lost, you will know how to find the way based on someone's guidance, as opposed to become dependent on one person. Yeah. And when it comes to holistic, by holistic we mean what we did in our madrasa was. And the reason why I want to talk about this is, we've heard a lot about Islamic education. We've heard about the virtues, we know the importance of Islamic education. We know that the very first word that was revealed in the Quran was Iqra, read. Okay? We know about the importance and why Islam, reiterates the importance of education. And we've heard this again and again. But very infrequently is there talks about the practical side of education. And that's why I want to give an example of our madrasa to look at the holistic side of things. So for instance, what we've done, we haven't actually followed, but we've seen one of the methods of doing it is to scrap the subjects. Okay. So we've taken away teaching according to subjects, but we teach according to projects. So for example, and just to give you an idea of this, Finland, okay, was one of the worst countries when it came to their education results. They were near the bottom. Over the past decade, they've made such drastic changes which have brought them all the way to number 1 and 2 always, number 1, 2, 3, past decade. Okay? And that one of the reasons was they got rid of all their subjects. Okay? So you won't have a lesson where you walk in whether you're doing maths, or a lesson where you walk in whether you're doing English. Okay? So what we try to do is similar way. We've taken away the concept of subjects. So if we're going to teach, so I'll just give you one example. Okay? And I always give the same example. Wudu. Now for us, teaching wudu would usually fall under the category of fiqh. Okay? But what we're saying is no. We don't have to specifically look at worship just in the context of fiqh. So when we teach wudu, for instance, we would teach wudu, the fiqh side of it, how to perform wudu. So the external, okay, the outer section of wudu, how Prophet ﷺ performed wudu. Now, number one. Number two, then we'll talk about the spiritual aspect, the internal of wudu. What wudu does, okay? What's the function of wudu? Even the hadith of Prophet ﷺ about sins leaving our body until they even come out of the fingertips of our fingers. Okay? So the external, how to do wudu. The spiritual, okay, the function of wudu, spiritually. And then also looking at how we can use wudu as a way to understand our world view. Okay? And in philosophy they call it Weltanschauung. Okay? Our world view. So what we did was we teach the children that Prophet ﷺ, he once saw this companion performing wudu, and he was using lots of water. And Prophet ﷺ told him not to use so much, not to do so much israf in water. So the companion was a bit, he was taken aback. He said, is there such a thing as wasting water in wudu? And Prophet ﷺ replied, yes. Even if you are ala nahrin jar, even if you are at a flowing stream, even then you cannot waste water. Okay? You can only use that much amount which is sufficient for you. Prophet ﷺ was teaching us that we are the Khalifa of Allah on earth. Okay? We are representatives of a higher being. Okay? We only use that much amount and use that much resources of the earth which are just about enough for us. We have to explain to students that if all the countries of the world were to use the amount of resources that the United Kingdom uses, so the amount of water, the amount of electricity and everything else, okay, we would need about 10 planets to sustain our needs. If every single person and every single country in this world use the amount of resources that our country does, then we would need 10 planets like ours to sustain and fulfill our needs. So that's why, so can you see from wudu, we're looking at the external, the fiqh, we're looking at the spiritual, then we're looking at how wudu plays a greater role in our world view, in how we view the world. So just by doing wudu, we do that. Okay? Now what we do practically to teach our students a lesson from this, so we're looking at holistic, just on the second point. We get in touch with this organization called MADE, for instance, and we got lots of these muds made. Okay, so you can get this made very cheap in a factory. This is the measurement that Prophet ﷺ used to use. The amount of water Prophet ﷺ used, it works out to be this much, okay, and mud. And we got these made, and we explained to them the whole function of isnad as well. Okay, that this measurement, it comes to us from someone before us, his name is there, from him all the way back to Prophet ﷺ. You can actually go to Medina. Okay? On the outskirts there's this museum, and in this museum they actually write an isnad. So they will write your name, and we'll have the name of the person there, and you will have the name of all the people back to Prophet ﷺ. So can you see that had we just focused on fiqh, we would just be teaching our children wudu. Later on, if they were to think about why they perform wudu, the bigger meaning of it, it will just be reduced to one subject. So here we looked slightly at usul al-hadith as well, because we brought in the concept of isnad, for instance. Also, so what we do is we give a gift of this plastic mud to every single child, and then they have this challenge for like 2-3 weeks, where they cannot use the tap water directly. They have to fill up their mud and perform wudu from the mud, as Prophet ﷺ did. Because what usually happens when you press a tap or turn the tap, there's lots of water flowing and you're using a bit, and as soon as you're washing your hands or your face, there's lots of water being wasted. We probably waste about 7 to 8 or 10 muds just by doing wudu. That's water that's just gone down the drain without even touching us. Okay? And Prophet ﷺ's teaching is that do not waste water in wudu. That becomes even more relevant for us today, even more so than with a companion, because surely he would have used less than from a pot. So anyway, so we give them out these muds, so for about a week or two, they have to only use, so even when they're brushing their teeth, they can only use that water from the mud. Okay? When they're performing their wudu, they use that water. Okay? Whatever they do, they've got to use that water from the mud itself. And then they've got to collect money for building a well in Africa. So can you tell me, there's about 5-6 subjects that we cover just with wudu, for instance. So then wudu no longer becomes a burdensome kind of fact learning exercise. Because nowadays we have internet, we have Wikipedia, and we've got so many websites to learn so many facts from. The question is, and it's what we call the epistemological question. What we mean by that is, what is education? Is it just about learning facts? Is it just about learning hundreds and hundreds of facts? Or is it about understanding Islam? Is it about understanding the deeper meaning behind Islam? That's why you have scholars like Imam Ghazali rahimahullah. They were amongst the greatest scholars of their time, fiqh-wise. Before they had this event in their life which changed them dramatically. Imam Ghazali, you can say, was in our understanding today of one of the best professors in Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard. Okay? People from all the way from Andalus used to travel to Persia just to sit in the company of Imam Ghazali rahimahullah. It so happened one day his tongue stopped. He could no longer read, he could no longer speak, he could no longer give sermons. And then he kept on thinking why so many doctors came, Hukama, Hakim came, and they couldn't figure out what was the problem with Imam Ghazali rahimahullah at the time. And they came to the conclusion that there's a deeper quest that Imam Ghazali is yearning for. And that's when he felt, and he's written an autobiography on this, which I would recommend to read, for everyone to read. And he explains how everything was so theoretical. It was similar to what the Pharisees were doing, not the Persians, but the Pharisees at the time of Isa alayhi salam, all the priests. Okay? They were very much literalists in their understanding of Judaism. And Isa alayhi salam came to change that notion. But coming back to the point, Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, he sold most of his goods, he left everything, and he went into the desert, trying to find himself. And that's one of the first chapters of his book. He went out on this quest. So we're coming back to the point about holistic education, that it's not just the learning of facts. There's something beyond that. And that's what we say to our students. In school, what happens is very important. The education we get at school allows us to live our life on earth. The education we are supposed to get in madrasa is one that allows us to live on earth and beyond, into the hereafter. And that explains its importance. Okay. Don't want to get stuck on these. The third point was we wanted an education in our madrasa which works towards keeping the hearts and minds of Muslim children open for Islam and the maktab after they leave the maktab. So what we wanted was students, as they come through and as they leave, once they've left, we wanted their hearts to remain open to Islam and to remain open towards the Prophet and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now that seems very pessimistic, it seems very negative. But the reason why we did that was, and it goes back to once when I was late to go back to Dubai, I was back a week late. And I had to catch a train going back to Yorkshire. And I got to Leeds and came out and sat in a taxi. And in my hand was this really big volume of all the Sihah Sittah, the 6 books of Hadith. So as I sat down at the back, behind the driver's seat, and placed that on my legs, the taxi driver, who was a Muslim, visibly, he started going around, he started doing tawaf around the car. And he seemed very distressed, very shocked. So then as he went round 2-3 times, and as he was just going up and down, I stopped him and I asked him, what's wrong? What seems to be the problem? And he calmed down after a little while, and then he told me that when he used to be in madrasa, when he was in madrasa, he was abused by one of the teachers there. Now, as part of his experience of life as a Muslim, whenever he sees a person with a beard and some books, it takes him back to the time when he was in madrasa being abused. So that's where the pessimistic notion came from. We have changed that, but can you see? These are some of the challenges. our children are facing here. They have a choice when they become 16. It's either the way of the madrasa or the way of the school. Okay? A lot of you may think, actually, schools are good. And yes, they are. Absolutely they are. But then we've got to think about the whole context that we live in the West as Muslims. And I will touch upon this later on, inshallah. Okay, number 4. The curriculum should be made relevant to students of the modern age. Okay? It needs to become relevant. It needs to touch their world experience as they're experiencing the world today. So there's many things that are happening in schools. Teachers need to become aware of them. There are many things that are happening in the world outside. Teachers need to become aware of that. Okay? So to make it relevant for them. So is it relevant for teachers to, for instance, talk about if a dog falls in a well, okay, how many buckets would she take out of the well? Is that relevant? Well, it may be relevant in certain countries, but it's not relevant here. Okay? So that's just 4 things that we started with. What we did now, after about 2.5 years, we kind of trying to restructure our notion of what a madrasa is, and us as a madrasa. We say, we are an academy, or a madrasa, which specializes in facilitating the cultural, so it's not just the religious aspect of a child, but it's the cultural, the historical background where everyone comes from. You know, a historian once said that if you do not know your history, if you do not know your historical context, you are like a leaf that has fallen from its tree and doesn't know its roots and where it's from. Okay? So the cultural, experiential, I've spoken about the experience, which will then include creating situations or events where students get to experience the relationship between a teacher and student and amongst students. Okay? For instance, camping is one. Just a quick practical example, camping. Okay? There are many, many more experiences that could be had. Okay? There's another example which I might give at the end if there's time, but if not, then we'll do that for another time. Yes, so we want madrasas which give our children the cultural education, the experiential education, the conscientious. Now, by conscientious, we mean education that makes them think. Okay? Where they become thinkers, they become focused. Now, for example, coming back to that example of the mud, and them doing wudu from the mud, because we've made them have that experience, for them going to the tap has changed forever. When they go to the tap, they will always have that in their mind. Even if they don't use the mud, for instance, they will make sure when they're brushing their teeth, they will close the tap. Okay? That makes them conscientious, makes them conscious all the time. Okay? For instance, when we are using our right hand for something, okay, or using our left hand for something, we constantly become conscious that I'm using my right hand because Allah is watching me. Conscientiousness like that. Okay? Focus on Allah. We've got to make them critical, so they think they have to constructively criticize everything around them. And if they're going to live in the West, this is one of the way forward. So that means both, in both institutions, especially in schools, for instance. Okay, and they've got to be critical in the true sense. The point of criticism is to find out the deeper meaning of things. That is the point of criticism. That's what I believe. Why are we critical? Why are we looking at something with a critical lens? To get to the bottom of it. Now, to give you one example, there was a point in time where I was covering a lesson in a college in Enfield. The subject was critical studies. Yeah? Critical studies. But what happened was, I went in, there were about 5-6 students, and I asked them how they do critical studies, how they look at things critically. And what they said, and we're talking about mainstream school. The students said that we read a chapter from a book and then answer questions at the end. I said, that's not criticism. That's not looking at something in a critical way. So then I said, look, let's do this different. Let's put away our textbooks today. Let me ask you a question, and then be critical of your response. And we'll go deeper and deeper, which we call the Socratic method. Okay? So I said to them, okay, what's your opinion? And I went straight in the deep end. I said, what's your opinion on homosexuality? Okay? What's your opinion on this, and why? So they said, oh, it's absolutely fine. Why is it fine? Oh, it's natural. Why is it natural? Oh, because academics have proven it, okay, through different scientific studies, etc., etc. I said, okay, that's fine. What about pedophilia? By paedophilia we mean adults having a relationship with younger children. Okay? So what's your opinion on that? So the students, all of them said, oh, it's disgusting. Why is it disgusting? Oh, it's unnatural. Why is it unnatural? Because it's just bad. Right? Kind of think about it. So can you see how their logical senses stop working just on the word paedophilia? So I said to them, look, what if I tell you, and it's actually happening, that academics and scientists are now saying that paedophilia is actually natural. Okay. So had I asked you this question 70 years ago about homosexuality, you would have said the same thing about what you say about paedophilia. You would have said it's unnatural, it's disgusting. Because academics had yet not proven it, and it never became mainstream. And if I ask you the same question in 50 years' time about paedophilia, your children or your children's children will say it's absolutely natural. So the question is, what do we base our morality and our ethics on? And is there such a thing as a universal moral code which all the humans abide by? Okay. So these are the kind of things that we've got to look at critically. Okay. So when students do go to school, they need to understand, our Muslim children, they need to know, especially when they're doing subjects, and I've been an RE teacher myself, they've got to understand that they have the right of their religion. They have the right to the freedom of their speech and the right to the freedom of expressing those thoughts. Okay. And according to their tradition, whatever their tradition says, okay, and obviously we're excluding any form of violence, okay, what their tradition says, they should be firm and confident on this. And the aim of madrasa should be to make Muslims confident in their faith, as opposed to just learning certain facts and being able to answer certain questions in a certain way, just as GCSEs do. Okay, so in GCSEs, when you're doing RE, even though it's supposed to be about ethics and morality, which is good, but it's about, okay, how do you answer a A-type question, or a B-type question, or a C-type question, or a D-type question? Oh, for D-type, you break them down into 6, portions, and you answer like this. You've got to give a for and against answer. And the focus is on how to answer a certain type of question. Okay? It's not awakening the deeper sense of spirituality inside a Muslim child. And I think that's where madrasas need to teach that. Okay? And it's got to be taught in many different ways, not just through the textbook or through lecturing. Okay, I'll move on. You've got to be creative. And creativity comes in many different ways. And just to give one example, Islamic art and calligraphy. So, just say Arabic calligraphy was actually something that took place in the Masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. Calligraphy was taught. People were taught, companions were taught how to write. Okay? If that was not the case, how would they have calculated or written out the zakat? How would they have written out the Quran? How would they have written out many things? So calligraphy is something that was taught in the Masjid of Prophet ﷺ. Islamic art, over so many years, over centuries, was one of the most greatest achievements of the Muslim Empire. Okay? Even till this day, did you know that over a few decades ago, in Masjid al-Aqsa, this extremist terrorist, right, either he was Christian or Jew, not really sure, he came into the Masjid with a bomb, and he threw a bomb at the mimbar, okay? The mimbar of Masjid al-Aqsa. And what happened was it was destroyed. Now that mimbar was commissioned by Salahuddin Ayyubi, rahimahullah. It was commissioned by one of his artists and architects. Now when it was destroyed, there was not enough information and not enough manpower and Islamic art experience and skill in the world to straight away recreate that member. There was it was made out of one piece of wood, okay, engraved, and that was done by one artist, okay, in the Muslim world. Now to remake that member, it took them, I think, almost a decade, about 10 years. It took them about 20 artists working on it at the same time. It took them so many competitions. It took them the backing of about 2 kings and 2-3 princes to remake that one member, which was commissioned by Salahuddin Ayyubi rahimahullah, one of his artists. They had to have competitions to find the best artists to take on this work. Okay, and I remember when they had the competition, It was London's Prince's School of Arts that won the competition. London's Prince's School of Art to remake. And what the professor did was he went to Syria, to the hometown of that artist. And what he did was he looked at different mosques, and finally he was able to find a mihrab, and in the corner of the mihrab was a signature of the artist who was there 700-800 years ago. And based on that signature, he was able to look at the artwork on that mihrab, which was still currently there at the time, and then come back and recreate using so many computer technology and software to finally come up with that minbar. So in Masjid al-Aqsa, the minbar that you have there took over 10 years, over 20 artists from all over the world, okay? So much money, 2 kings, about 2-3 princes, all working to Prince's School of Art in London, all working together on what one Muslim artist and one Muslim leader created and commissioned. Can you see how Muslims were very creative? They changed the world forever. We understand about the Muslim inventions. Okay? There's so many things Muslims have given to the world. Muslims are still giving so much to the world. It's just that the world has become more secularized in its outlook. So we don't see the world as the block of Christianity, block of Islam, block of Hinduism. We don't see the world in that way anymore. We are interlinked. It's a global village. There are so many Muslims who have done so much already. Okay, it's just to reconfirm and reaffirm this idea into the minds of our children that yes, you can be the greatest scientist, but remember you are Muslim first. Your ethics, your values, your morality, your culture, your history is one of Islam. Okay? And take along with you what Islam teaches you. Not everyone's going to become a scholar. Not everyone's going to become an alim. Okay? But everyone needs to become a good Muslim. A Muslim who's well versed in their culture, has good experience of Islam, is conscientious of what they're doing every step of their life, right? Is critical, but at the same time creative in what they do. And not only that, the most important thing is synthesizing. I think the way creativity comes in is through the synthesis of the traditional and modern contemporary ideas. And there's many things that we think are contemporary and modern ideas, yet if we go back, they have already been practiced and taught to us by our elders. Okay? And I'll give you some examples as well. Yeah. So I've taken an awfully long time on what I was supposed to do just for 5 minutes, but I've gone through a lot of what I was supposed to mention. Now, what I want to talk about, I'll try and finish by 1:45, inshallah, so you have enough time to do a bit of dhikr as well before salah and iftar. What I want to do now is look at a brief context, a brief look at the historical context that madrasas find themselves. Now, what I mean by that is that how are madrasas like, just say 500 years ago, in the West? Now, when I say West in this context, I'm referring to the geographical context. So by West, we're talking about Europe, and in this regard, we're talking about Spain. So Muslims ruled Spain, or Andalus, for about 700 to 800 years. Now, how were madrasas in Spain or in Andalus at the time? But at the same time, how were they in Al-Maghrib, in Morocco, which was all Muslim, which was majority Muslim? How were they in Tunisia, in Ifriqiya, okay, which was majority Muslim? Okay? And compared to that, how were madrasas in Andalus? Now the thing is, it's very difficult to find this information, but alhamdulillah, we have someone called Ibn Khaldun, rahimahullah. Anyone heard of Ibn Khaldun before? Anyone heard of Ibn Khaldun? He is known as the father of sociology, or a Western subject. He is known as one of the founding fathers of this subject. Now he's also a historian. Okay. Now he has written a book called The Muqaddimah. This is another very, very interesting book to read. Okay. There's summarized translations on Amazon in one volume. It's actually a very large book. Now, what he does in Muqaddimah, I'll just give you a brief context of what the Muqaddimah is. What Ibn Khaldun, rahimahullah, does in Muqaddimah, just to give you back, he was born in Tunisia, he's travelled from Andalus all the way to the east. What he does is, in this book, all the places that he travelled to, okay, he writes up the rise and fall of nations. He writes up the different things that are going on, how the leaders are leading, and ultimately he describes how nations rise and fall. Okay? And specifically Muslim nations. And for instance, he talks about the Bedouins and the concept of asabiyah, which I'm not going to go into. Okay? Asabiyah here is very different to the normal translation of asabiyah. So in Muqaddimah, he describes that, for instance, the Bedouins, the Arabs, when they lived in the desert and in the hardship of the deserts, okay, they were on the rise. But when they took over urban centers, when they took over cities, and they started living in palaces and in luxury, and they were no longer going through that struggle and strife, they began to fall. Okay? He says normally that's the summary of history of the nations, how they rise and fall. Okay? And there's a poem from Allama Iqbal who kind of, I feel, summarizes this book in one poem. Okay? Iqbal says, "Aat tujhko bataun main taqdeer umam kya hai, shamshir sana awwal ta'us rubab akhir," which means, come, let me tell you. It says, come, let me tell you the history of nations. "Aat tujhko bataun main taqdeer umam kya hai." Come, let me tell you the destiny of nations. Shamshir sana awwal ta'us rubab akhir, which means that nations rise in the shadow of swords and in the shadow of struggle and strife and making efforts. Okay? And they fall in the shadow of musical instruments and in luxury. Okay? So this is the kind of summary of the book. Now, in the book, we find that Ibn Khaldun rahimahullah goes to different madrasas. Okay? And he gives us a kind of a voyage into different madrasas in 4 different empires or 4 different states. Now we're going to, what I've summarized them very briefly, which I want to go through, and then bring the whole idea back to our madrasas and what we're doing, and why we may need to rethink what we are doing here. Yeah? So what I'm trying to argue here is this, that through Ibn Khaldun, what I will say is madrasas in Al-Andalus were very different, very advanced, because they had to be. Muslims, despite them leading in the country and despite them being rulers, there was still a fair amount of minority. Okay? Muslims were a minority. So they had to up the game when it came to Islamic education and education in general. Whereas it was different compared to the other Muslim states. And how us, for instance, so far, our madrasas have pretty much on average been a copy and paste of what's been happening of the madrasas in India and Pakistan. Madrasas in India and Pakistan, they're set for a majority Muslim environment, where your uncles are Muslim, your neighbors are Muslim, your family, everyone's Muslim. So children learn Islam during their life. It's a very experience-based education for children back at home. Here is a very different game altogether. Okay? So, one thing I remember was I was doing some research, and I added this in because it was a quite cool anecdote, that when we came from India, Pakistan, we brought alongside us the samosas, the papadums, and also our madrasas. Okay? So that's what it is. I mean, samosas are doing pretty well, so are the papadums. But we've got to ask about our madrasas. So that's a good question. So Ibn Khaldun, let's just go on a voyage and on a journey with Ibn Khaldun into these places. So Al-Andalus was one of them, where he looked at madrasas and spoke about them. He went to Al-Maghrib, which we call Morocco in modern day. We have Ifriqiya, which was Tunisia, Algeria, these areas. And then the East. Okay? So, what I want to do is give a brief summary of all 4, and you can see the differences. And then we've got to rethink us here today. In the West, where we're not leaders or rulers, we are a minority. We are a minority in this country. Okay, so Al-Andalus. The type of education in Andalus was instruction was given in reading and writing. Remember, this is a madrasa. We're not talking about school here, we're just talking about madrasa. They were taught reading and writing. So, just to remind you, Al-Andalus is a Western country. Okay, in today's geographical sense, it's the West, it's Spain. Muslims had many madrasas, they're very beautiful madrasas with fine arts. Okay, they will teach them reading and writing. The Quran was the basis and was at the foundation and the crux of everything, as it is normally in every madrasa. But they did not restrict to the Quran only. They didn't just say, okay, we're just going to be teaching the Quran. This is a huge difference, because I will show you another country where they just restrict it to the Quran. Until you finish, only then you move on. But the question is, what happens if you don't finish? That means you don't move on, you don't become educated in any other science. Anyway, so in Andalus, they're teaching reading and writing. They are teaching the Quran, but they're not restricting to the Quran. Yeah, huge difference. They also teach poetry, composition, expert knowledge of Arabic, and good handwriting. So we're referring here to calligraphy, in a sense. Okay. They do not stress teaching of the Quran more than the other subjects. In fact, they are more concerned with teaching handwriting than any other subject until the child reaches manhood. Okay. So can you see, it's a good mixed curriculum in Spain. Let's see what happens once you cross the sea over into Morocco. Restrict the education of children to the Quran. Okay. That's what happens in Morocco. They don't feel that you need to read or write. You need to firstly, foremost, put the Quran at the front. Only once you finish the Quran, only then do other subjects come along. But the problem that curriculum could cause is that if you don't finish the Quran, if you're unable to read the Quran, if you're not a good reciter or reader, then you will not be able to go to other subjects. Okay? Such as traditions, okay, that will only happen afterwards, until the pupil is skilled in the Quran. So you've got to be able to recite the Quran correctly according to Tajweed and its rules. Only then can you move on to other subjects. Okay. They use it to also with old people who study the Quran after part of their life has passed. Consequently, Maghribis know the orthography of the Quran and know it by heart. That's one of the things about Maghrib, even today. Okay? Because of that emphasis on the Quran, you'll get some of the best Hafid of the Quran from Morocco. Okay? I remember one of our friends who had friends who studied in Morocco, just even now as we speak. They don't have a Quran to study from. They have a blackboard, or possibly now they might have a white one, okay, because we are moving on. So they get this board, and the teacher comes in, and the teacher begins to recite, and the students write out the Quran. They are writing, okay? And until that board is filled, that's all they have till the next day. And they've got to make sure it doesn't rain, okay? Otherwise you will get wiped off. So what happens is they begin to read from beginning to the end, and that is their sabak until the next day. And they've got to memorize that thoroughly, because they won't see that ever again. Okay? It's got to be committed to memory. One of the same friend was telling me that they're also fidgeting with something. Maybe that's where the fidget spinner kind of came back from. But anyway, that's one of them. Even now, they're very good at the Quran. And it goes back to this tradition. Okay? Now the people of Ifriqiya, so we're looking at Tunisia here. Now this is a very interesting one. I'll tell you why this is interesting. Despite it being majority Muslim and a safe Muslim land at the time for Muslims, and they weren't afraid of any kind of takeover or ideological, and colonization happened 700-800 years later. What happened was, towards the end of Muslim rule in Spain, in Andalus, right, Muslims were being expelled. Not just Muslims, but Jews as well. Okay, because Muslims and Jews live together. Okay, because theologically, Muslims and Jews are closer than Christians. Okay? But in other ways, they're not. So what happened was, when Christians came back as Reconquista, Muslims were thrown out. Before many Muslims were thrown out, a lot of the Muslims, they migrated to, Muslim scholars especially, migrated to Ifriqiya. Now when they migrated, they took all their curriculum, their madrasa style, they copied and pasted it in Tunisia. And that's why you will see, it's very similar to the one in Andalus. Okay, it's very similar. So let's have a look. Combine the instruction of children in the Quran and also hadith. See, they're bringing in hadith. They also teach basic scientific norms. They teach science. Okay, where is that coming from? They teach, and some of the great Al-Khwarizmi and these guys have come from these madrasas. They stress even, when it comes to algebra, it probably came up in one of these madrasas, which we use till this day, and it comes up in GCSE all the time. They stress giving their children a good knowledge of the Quran and acquainting them with its various readings more than anything else. So they teach different ahruf, the different ways of reciting the Quran. Next, they stress handwriting. Okay? By handwriting, again, it's calligraphy. In general, their method of instruction in the Quran is closer to the Spanish method. Thinking about this, I believe it's because of the copy and paste. It's a very similar thing. Why is majority of India and Pakistan Hanafis today? Okay? It could be explained with the basic fact that when the Mongolians, with Genghis Khan and Halaku Khan and all these Khans, when they came and they sacked Baghdad, okay, there were many Hanafi scholars there who took their books and they migrated to Hind. And all that corpus of knowledge went over to India. That's why most of us are Hanafi. And all these migrations, they have so much of an effect on people. Okay? And these migrations, it's very, very interesting to see how many of us have so much DNA, not just from India, but from all over the world. It's very, very interesting. I happen to do my DNA test. I happen to be 4.8% Greek. Okay? So it just goes to show how migration and travel in the past have so much effect, not just on us humans, but on the way we think. 100 years from now, okay, if someone like Ibn Khaldun does a history of madrasas here, there's people already doing it, they are already saying that madrasas here, and by madrasas I'm talking about the after-school school, okay, the after-school madrasas in the masjids, they are pretty much a copy and paste. One person I spoke to a few years ago, he said as soon as he steps into a local mosque madrasa, it feels like he stepped into India, okay? Or it feels like he's gone back to Pakistan, okay? And he gets that nostalgia for those for those few hours. So we've got to understand that is this what we are about here? Is this how we are going to go forward? Lastly, people of the East, okay, the Far East, as far as we know, likewise they have a mixed curriculum, pretty much mixed. Focus mainly is the Quran again. So where there's majority Muslim countries, it's just the Quran. Because they will learn Islam overall. Not everyone back at home, in India back home, learns everything in a madrasa. They'll just learn their 5 kalimas. Okay? Which, if we were to go to Umar radiallahu anhu and say to him, can you recite your 5th kalima? He won't know what that is. Oh, can you recite your 3rd kalima? He won't know that. 2nd, okay, or 4th. These were called the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th back at home in India, Pakistan, to make a certain kind of curriculum very easy, straightforward to learn for our students. When I got married in Pakistan, I was in a masjid and the khutbah was about to take place and the imam stopped me and he asked me to say the 1st kalima again. And that for me was a cultural shock. Well, why that? And then he made me say the 2nd kalima. Luckily, I had attended Queen's Road Mosque, and at that time it was pretty much India copied and pasted. So I learned all the 5 kalimas, and then the 3rd and the 4th, and the 5th, and the 6th and 7th as well, obviously. Okay, and only then was I allowed to get married. Other than that, it was not allowed. So so that's what happened. So coming back to here, so teaching of the Quran, they do not combine instruction in the Quran with instruction in handwriting. So it's pretty much like Morocco. You've got to learn your Quran first, comes first, then anything else. Okay? And this is something that we've got to rethink. We've got to think about this. Okay? Are we going to have this step by step, or are we going to have this holistic altogether, like the wudu example that I gave? They have special rules for teaching it, and there are special teachers for it. So it's talking about their curriculum, how it works, just like any other craft which is taught and not included in school curriculum for children. I just realised it's 1:45. I'll try and finish this. The children's slates. I quite like this bit. The children's slates, so the exercise books, exhibit an inferior form of handwriting. So that goes to show that they don't focus on handwriting in the East. Okay? It's just about understanding the Quran and just being able to communicate yourself, just being able to write, but not the focus on calligraphy and the beautification of writing. In our madrasa, what we say to students, and when we teach them Islamic art, when it comes to geometry, how Muslims use geometry, because when they went to, for instance, when they went to the Persian Empire, the Sasanian Empire, when they went to the Christian Empire, okay, the Byzantine Empire, they looked at the forms of art there, and there's obviously lots of pictures in those forms of art. And in the masjid, you can't have pictures, so they use geometry. The most perfect form of art was using geometry, maths, and things like this. And they incorporated that perfection and that beauty within their art. And this is what we say to our students is that we trace back to the concept which Prophet ﷺ gave us. That inna Allaha jameel yuhibbul jamal. That indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beautiful and He loves beauty. Yeah? And you'll be surprised how much Willie Morris, yeah? And he was one of the Waltham Stowe's and he's also founding father of Labour Party. okay? One of the founding fathers. And he was one of the greatest artists that Walthamstow, this country has ever had. He took so much from Islamic art. So much he took from Islamic art. The tessellations, the repetition, all that was taken from Muslims. And he talks about the concept of beauty. He lived in an industrialized world. He lived in an industrialized world where everything started becoming grey and dull and polluted. And he's trying to fight this industrialism. And he's saying, no. He's talking about the concept of beauty in everything that you see. I would recommend seeing William Morris Gallery, because you can see the kind of feeling of Islamic art that comes through his work. In the British, in the Victoria and Albert Museum, one of the main attractions there is this carpet that's been taken from Persia. That was brought over and checked because there was a fire in this Khanqah in Persia. And as a result of that fire, there were two carpets, very big carpets. They both burnt, half-half. So what William Morris had to oversee was the recreation from two burnt carpets into one main one. And the leftover pieces were sent to America, which are in a museum there. So he was able to work with Islamic art and be able to, complete that carpet. But I'm going way off the topic and target here. But coming back, Ibn Arabi, one of the greatest philosophers out there, maybe will disagree with some of his ideas, but here he's talking about the Quran and the idea of Islamic education. He says, how thoughtless are our people in that they teach children the Quran when they are first starting out. So can you see how he's going against the idea that's prevalent in Morocco and also in the East? He's saying, look, how thoughtless are people that all they're teaching them is the Quran as soon as they start. They read things they do not understand and work hard at something that is not as important for them as other matters. Can you see how we are trying to go back to some of our ideas before? Okay? That we've got to teach them, especially here, that is not a majority Muslim country. That's not always the case that they will learn Islam throughout their life through their experiences from their uncles and aunties and neighbors. It's not like that here. We live in a very mixed environment. There's nothing wrong with that. It's very diverse. However, how do they become confident Muslims? Our curriculum has to be one that is relevant to them, one that makes them confident as Muslims. We need to ask them difficult questions in the madrasa, in that safe environment. Otherwise, once they are asked these difficult questions outside, it will confuse them. And unfortunately, what's happening today is this this wind of confusion is spreading afar. It's spreading everywhere. I remember once we met some brothers from the Tablighi Jamaat from Gasht. So Gasht is this practice which the brothers from Tablighi Jamaat say is where they go out, okay, and knock on Muslims' doors to talk to them about Allah and bring them to the mosque. It's literally a 2-3 minute talk. Okay? And what they do is they knock and they speak and they come out. From one Gasht, in one day, it was only about, I think, half an hour, they came back saying that 2 of the Muslims that they met, or 2 of the people that they met, used to be Muslims, now they're ex-Muslims. And both for the same reason, that they had read Richard Dawkins' book, okay, about God. So, what I'm saying, I'm an Ari teacher myself, and when I teach the existence of God, I do tell the students there who are Christian, Muslim, Jews, and also atheists, that Richard Dawkins, when he wrote his book, in his introduction, he challenges the reader. He says that before you put this book down, you would have left your faith. That's the challenge. Okay? And many people read this book, and a lot of them do leave Islam. Okay? And it's happening here. I'm talking about Walthamstow. I also had an accident on the way here with someone who had left Islam. Okay? Just to explain to you how big the problem is. Okay? It wasn't on purpose. It was just I was going and he was about to turn onto the main road. But what happened was, Richard Dawkins, so what I explain to my students is, you have to look at the bigger picture. You have to have this bigger understanding. Richard Dawkins written this one book, and then what I do is I take in about 10 books, which I have, and I put them next to Richard Dawkins' book. And I say, here's 10 responses that have been written against this one Richard Dawkins book. Okay, 10 different responses. The only unfortunate thing in our Muslim context is, none of them have been written by Muslims. They've all been written by Christians, okay, or Jews. I think there's 1 or 2 books now that have started coming out, not directly responding to Richard Dawkins, but talking about Islam and reason. Okay. So it's important that in our madrasas, okay, we teach, and even in our mosques, we talk about these difficult questions. Because we are here in the West, we can no longer shy away from these. We have to talk about these. For instance, evolution. Talking about this from a Muslim perspective, what it is. How do Muslims see this? How do Muslim scientists talk about this? So these are some of the things we have to talk about to make Islam and their faith relevant to the children today in the modern West. Okay. So, coming back to, and I'll finish up here inshallah. Coming back to the whole conclusion, what is our pedagogy and philosophy? Are we to adapt or rather create? Are we, based on what I've explained, that in Andalus, Spain, where Muslims were fewer in number, they were minority, majority non-Muslim, Muslims took it upon themselves in their madrasas to teach their children everything, to make them confident so that they are amongst the higher strata of society, so that they are very well versed and very well educated. As opposed to the majority of Muslim countries where growing up as Muslim and understanding Islam was much easier going than it would have been in a non-Muslim or non-majority Muslim state. What is our epistemology? What is education? That's the question. Okay. If education is about the learning of facts, then learning lots and lots of things and just memorizing things, that's fine. Okay? But the question is, will that help a child? Okay? Will that help a child in the future? Will that help a child in the future when he's bombarded by the challenges in the modern West? I don't think so. Okay? And that's why the purpose of me coming today and talking about some of this stuff is for us to think. Because change, first of all, comes when we begin to think about these things. I feel at this time that there are certain people talking about this, but I think as a ummah as a whole here in the West, we have to rethink and to at least think about how our madrasas start. And alhamdulillah, they started well and they're going. But where are they heading? Okay? What do we need to do? These are some of the things we've got to really think about. Okay? Just to quickly, I'll conclude on this. Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, just give an example of how madrasas should look like. Okay? Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, sometimes we just take him to be a Sufi. He was more than that. He was one of the greatest faqirs of his time. He was one of the greatest theologians of his time, and also he's one of the greatest educationists of his time, or teachers. He says, have fun with your child for 7 years and perform ta'deeb on them for 7 years. Okay? How could we adopt some of that? We send our children to madrasa when they're 5, when they're 4. Okay, that's fine. But then if we expect them to sit down in one place for 1 hour, 2 hours, looking at that one line on that page for 2 hours, or 1 hour even, okay? We're going opposed to our own Islamic understanding of a child's upbringing. Imam Ghazali is saying, let your child have fun for 7 years. So yes, send him to madrasa, but have your classrooms spaces where they are able to move around, where they're able to use games. And Imam Ghazali mentions this, and it's not something I'm taking from the Western world, all we can. Imam Ghazali is saying that prevention of the child from playing games and constant insistence on learning deadens his or her heart, blunts his sharpness of wit, and burdens his life. He looks for a ruse to escape them altogether. Okay? He says that, in fact, play could even be used as a way to encourage children to learn, presumably through games that had some educational purpose or as a form or reward of studying. Is Imam Ghazali saying this 900 years ago, or almost a millennium? Another scholar says the same thing from the Mamluk, Persian Muslim Empire, also from the Mamluk Empire. One of the most, Mamluk Empire was one of the most traditional in the sense that it wasn't influenced by the West, or it wasn't influenced by, ideas from others. They were influencing others. Okay? I think I'll stop here because that would take longer and we'll probably do that on another day, inshallah. So if you have a cancellation and if I'm available, I wouldn't mind jumping in at the point. Just to finish off, last few minutes, any questions based on that? Because the next bit is important, but I will leave that for now. Yes?
So how do you bring the changing?
Absolutely. So I think the purpose of today was to get everyone to think. Okay? So if you ask me this question, how can I bring this change on a personal level, what I decided to do was start a madrasa. And not see it as a madrasa itself, but to see it as a lab, okay? As an experience for the children. And try different things to see how the children react to that. Now, there are children in our madrasa, for instance. So we now have about 230 children in 2.5 years. When we started with our first class, we had about 23 to 24 students. Now, some of the students who have been with us for 2.5 years, if you were to ask them a question about the existence of God or anything else, you will see that confidence that they bring back to you. You will see the confidence that they kind of feel in being a Muslim and in responding as a Muslim. Okay? They may not know all the facts because our curriculum is not based on facts. It's based on them feeling confident as Muslims and to have that iman inside them. So when we say having that iman, we're looking at it in two ways, right? The spiritual and intellectual. There's two ways that we are trying to make this change. So everyone else will respond in a different way. Okay? But I think today it's about the idea of thinking about that there needs to be change. How can we help our local madrasa in this change?
Yeah, one more thing I realised, 90% of children cannot write Alif to Ya in Arabic.
Yeah.
That's very sad, really.
Yeah.
And how are we going to bring the change in from Monday to Friday in 10 hours to our madrasa, where there is children, 25 to 30 children at a time? How are we going to bring change in that?
There's many ways to do that. Now, for instance, our madrasa, we don't do Monday to Friday, we do weekends. 4 hours on the weekend. So instead of having chunks spread out, we do it on the weekend. Now, that shows there's two types of models. One is the 5 days a week, 2 hours a day. The other one is 4 hours in one day. Now, some of the parents, they asked me that, look, actually, isn't it better that students go 5 days a week as opposed to 1 day a week? So what I say to parents is there's no evidence to prove that. Okay? No one's researching this. No one has gone about to research whether it's better to have 5 days of madrasa or just 1 day but all together. There's no research that's been done. At the moment we think, okay, because it's more, it's better. Okay? It's a bit like buying peas from a frozen aisle in Asda and then getting peas from a farm. Okay? Which would you prefer in regards to health? Okay, the ones at Asda will be cheaper, you'll get much more. But whereas the ones from the farm will be more organic. So that kind of research has not been done yet. So I think it's important that when we do begin our journey of change, it's so that it's backed by research, it's backed by actual people going out testing. Okay, here are, for instance, students in madrasa where there's 5 days a week, okay? It's 10 days there. How well are they doing over the next 10 years? Okay? How is it having an impact on their life? And here are 10 students from a madrasa where it's only once a week or twice a week on the weekend. Let's follow them for 10 years. Where is the impact taking place? So I think studies like that need to take place. So another answer for how does this change take place? We need to firstly, what Imam Ghazali rahimahullah says, look into ourselves. Try and understand, research where we're coming from, why we're doing things in a certain way. So for instance, in our madrasa, one of the straight changes we made was we got rid of exams. Because we felt that exams were irrelevant. They were irrelevant because exams are there to test mainly your memorization and also your understanding of certain things in certain rigid ways. Okay? Now, do we need that in a madrasa? I don't think so. We may need it in school because you need to have your GCSEs in order to get into college, and then you need your A-levels in order to get, so that there's that sequence there. But why do you need that in a madrasa? And it all goes back to the question of what is education for us? Is it the learning of facts to be able to answer the exam questions? Or is it to influence the hearts and minds of children? So that later on, when they are experiencing the challenges of the world, they're able to respond from Muslim ethics and Muslim values and morality. So these are some of the and change when it comes, it's got to come from different, one of the main things is finance here. Okay? To be able to finance this change, to be able to get those teachers that you need to be able to get the resources that we need. Okay? And all of this, because we live in a capitalist world, we cannot do this without finance. So that's some of the things that are incredibly important. Yeah.
I think teachers need to be more trained how to educate our children.
Yes, absolutely. But just to add to that as well, definitely that's like the ABC training. There's no doubt our teachers need to be trained. I think it begins with one thing, and that's our philosophy. That's our epistemology. Why are we educating? Okay? What is the reason behind what we are doing in madrasas? Okay? If we look at, and this is what I was going to talk about here. If you look back in history, there's always two forces at work. One is the oppressor, one is the oppressed. One is the zalim, and one is the mazloom. And you will always find yourself in either one of those camps. Prophet ﷺ, he said, if you see a zalim and a madloom, okay, you should help both of them. So companions, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum said, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we understand the helping of the madloom, the oppressed, but how on earth do we help the oppressor, the tyrant? Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, by stopping them from their oppression, by stopping them, by holding their hand in their oppression. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he found himself amongst the oppressive society in Mecca. As a prophet, it wasn't fit for him to remain in the category of oppressed. You have to crush both. You have to break away with both. Okay? And that's why Prophet ﷺ, he wasn't happy in that state of oppression. He used to go to Mount Hira, okay? And he used to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that change. He was able to see that society crumbling and being coloured by its oppression. So with Prophet ﷺ, ultimately, when he did educate the companions, when they did come back to Makkah, it was amazing how he crushed the notion of oppressor and oppressed. Okay? When Abu Sufyan radiallahu anhu, then when Hind radiallahu anha at that time, when Prophet ﷺ came, he had the chance at that time to behead and kill all those people in Mecca who were oppressing the people at the time. Prophet ﷺ forgave all of them. And this was him crushing the whole idea of oppressor and oppressed. And inshallah we'll continue with this on another day, in another time, inshallah.
I had a few more questions, inshallah, next
Yeah, inshallah, definitely.
It was a very important one.
Absolutely. If you do have any questions, you can email me as well. You get my details from me as well. My email is thisishamid@gmail.com. So if you have any questions, subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanallah wa bihamdihi, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.